She thought she was selling just one night at the charity auction to save her mother's life. But when the mysterious tycoon made his astronomical bid, he revealed a devastating condition that would make her a prisoner for an entire year, pretending to be his fiancée in front of the world. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the medical bill, $400,000. The numbers blurred through her tears as she sat in the hospital cafeteria, the harsh fluorescent lights making everything feel surreal. Her mother's experimental treatment wasn't covered by insurance, and without it, the doctors had given her 6 months to live. 6 months. The coffee in her paper cup had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't stop gripping it like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. The charity auction invitation had been sitting in her purse for 3 days. Golden lettering on cream paper, the kind of elegant stationery she'd only seen in movies about rich people. Someone had left it at the nurse's station with a note saying they were looking for volunteers to participate. Sarah had laughed when she first saw it. What could she possibly offer to people who had everything? But now, staring at that impossible number, she wondered if maybe there was something she'd never thought of as valuable before. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Sweetie, don't worry about the money, we'll figure something out." But Sarah knew they wouldn't. Her mother's optimism had carried them through Sarah's childhood after her father left, through nursing school, when money was so tight they ate pasta for weeks, through every crisis that had shaped Sarah into the woman who couldn't give up on anything or anyone. That same optimism was now a knife in her chest, because this time hope wasn't enough. The auction was tomorrow night. Sarah had exactly 18 hours to decide if she was brave enough to do something that terrified her more than any emergency room crisis she'd ever faced. She thought about her mother's face when the doctor had explained the treatment, how her eyes had lit up with possibility for the first time in months. That look was worth any sacrifice. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and women in designer gowns glided between tables like they'd been born to this world. Sarah's black dress, borrowed from her roommate and altered hastily that afternoon, felt like a costume. She kept tugging at the hem, her palms sweating as she watched the auction items being presented. Vacations to private islands, artwork worth more than she'd make in 5 years, a week with a celebrity chef. Each item drew bids that made her stomach clench. What was she thinking? She was about to make a fool of herself in front of these people who probably spent more on lunch than she made in a month. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice boomed across the room, "our next item is something truly special. A young woman has generously offered her time and companionship for one evening. Dinner, conversation, and the rare gift of genuine company in our increasingly artificial world." Sarah's legs felt weak as she walked to the small platform. The spotlight was blinding, but she could sense hundreds of eyes on her. Her voice cracked as she spoke into the microphone. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I'm a nurse at Children's Memorial Hospital. I believe in helping people, and tonight I'm hoping someone might help me help my mother." The words came out in a rush, not at all the elegant speech she'd practiced. The bidding started at $5,000. Sarah's heart hammered as the numbers climbed. 10,000. 15. 25. She caught glimpses of faces in the crowd, some curious, some dismissive, others calculating. At $50,000, she couldn't breathe. This was already more money than she'd ever imagined, but she needed so much more. Then a voice from the back of the room cut through everything else. $200,000. The ballroom went silent. Sarah squinted past the lights, trying to see who had spoken. A man stepped forward, and even from the stage she could feel the power radiating from him. Tall, sharp-featured, with grey threading through dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He wore his expensive suit like armor, and when he looked at her, Sarah felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the dress or the stage. "Do I hear 250? The auctioneer called out, but no one responded. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. "Going once, twice. Sold to Mr. Alexander Hartley for $200,000. Alexander Hartley. Sarah had heard that name before, seen it in newspaper headlines about mergers and acquisitions, real estate deals that reshaped the city skyline. He owned half of downtown Denver and was known for his ruthless business tactics. What did a man like that want with her? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Sarah stayed long enough to complete the paperwork, her signature shaky as she committed to an evening she couldn't begin to imagine. When Alexander Hartley approached her afterward, his presence seemed to absorb all the air around them. "Miss Mitchell," his voice was deep, controlled. "We should talk privately. There are conditions to discuss." They met the next morning in his office on the 42nd floor of the Hartley building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the mountains that made Sarah feel dizzy. Alexander sat behind a desk that probably cost more than her car, studying documents with the same intensity she'd seen surgeons use before complex operations. "Before we proceed," he said without looking up, "you should know that I don't do anything without thorough research. I know about your mother's diagnosis. I know about your financial situation. I know you work double shifts to pay for nursing school loans and still send money to your younger brother in Phoenix." Sarah's face burned. "You investigated me. I investigate everyone I do business with. And make no mistake, Miss Mitchell, this is business." He finally looked at her and his gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. The evening of companionship was simply the legal framework. What I'm actually purchasing is something far more valuable. "I don't understand." Alexander stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "My family has certain expectations. My board of directors has certain concerns about my personal life or lack thereof. There are social obligations that require a particular type of partner, someone refined, intelligent, capable of representing the Hartley name in public." Sarah's stomach dropped. "You want me to pretend to be your girlfriend, not girlfriend, fiancé for 1 year. You'll move into my penthouse apartment, attend social functions as my intended bride, and convince everyone that I've finally found the woman worthy of my attention." He turned back to her, and his expression was unreadable. "In return, I'll ensure your mother receives the best possible care, regardless of cost." "You're insane." The words slipped out before Sarah could stop them. "I'm practical. You need money. I need a convincing performance. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Sarah stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. "I can't lie to everyone for a year. I can't pretend to be in love with you. You can and you will. The alternative is watching your mother die while you accumulate debt that will take you 20 years to pay off." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather. "I'm not asking you to actually love me, Miss Mitchell. I'm asking you to be an actress. Surely saving your mother's life is worth a year of your time." The casual cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. But underneath her anger was the terrible knowledge that he was right. What choice did she really have? "I need time to think about this. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the offer expires." He returned to his desk and picked up another document, dismissing her as if she were already gone. "My assistant will show you out." Sarah barely remembered the elevator ride to the ground floor. The city streets felt different somehow, as if she was seeing them through a window instead of walking through them. People hurried past on their way to normal jobs, normal lives, normal problems that could be solved with hard work and determination. She envied every single one of them. That night, she sat beside her mother's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Maria Mitchell looked so small against the white sheets, her usually vibrant face pale and drawn. She'd been the strongest person Sarah had ever known, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table, never missing a school play or soccer game despite her exhaustion. Now, she needed Sarah to be strong for both of them. "Mija," her mother whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "You look troubled." "I'm fine, Mom, just tired." "You work too hard. You need to find a nice boy. Settle down. Give me some grandchildren before I'm too old to spoil them." Maria's smile was weak but genuine. Sarah's throat tightened. If she took Alexander's deal, her mother would live to see those grandchildren. But the price was becoming someone she'd never wanted to be. A liar, a fraud, a woman who sold herself for money. Everything her mother had taught her not to be. "I love you, Mum. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." Walking home through the quiet streets, Sarah felt the weight of the decision crushing down on her. Alexander Hartley was offering her everything she needed and demanding everything she was in return. By tomorrow morning, she had to decide who she wanted to be: the honest woman who let her mother die, or the liar who saved her life. Her apartment felt smaller than usual when she finally got home. The cramped kitchen where she'd cooked countless meals, the second-hand furniture she'd been so proud to afford, the photographs of her family that covered every surface, it all felt like it belonged to someone else, someone she was about to leave behind forever. Sarah pulled out the business card Alexander's assistant had given her and stared at the embossed lettering. Such a simple thing to hold so much power. One phone call would change everything. One, Rodriguez, would transform her from Sarah Mitchell, nurse, into someone she couldn't even imagine yet. She thought about her mother's voice saying, "We'll figure something out," and knew that wasn't true. They were out of options, out of time, out of miracles. All that was left was this impossible choice between her soul and her mother's life. The business card felt heavier than it should as Sarah reached for her phone. Her finger hovered over the numbers, and she realized that no matter what she chose, she'd never be the same person again. The woman who walked into Alexander Hartley's office tomorrow would be forever different from the one sitting in this apartment tonight. But her mother would live. That had to be enough. Sarah dialed the number, and when Alexander's assistant answered, she heard herself say the words that would change everything. "Tell Mr. Hartley I accept his offer." The penthouse apartment felt like a museum. Everything was perfect, untouched, cold. Sarah stood in the marble foyer holding her single suitcase, feeling like an intruder in a space that probably cost more than most people's houses. Alexander had left her a key and a note with instructions. "Make yourself comfortable. We have dinner with the Blackwood family tomorrow at 8. Dress appropriately. No warmth, no welcome, just business." The master bedroom was larger than her entire apartment had been. A king-size bed dominated the space, flanked by nightstands that gleamed like mirrors. Sarah opened the walk-in closet and gasped. Dozens of dresses, shoes, and accessories hung in perfect rows, all in her exact size. A small card attached to one of the dresses read, "These should suffice for public appearances." A.H., even his generosity felt calculated. She found Alexander in his home office that evening, surrounded by documents and talking rapidly into a Bluetooth headset. He gestured for her to wait while he finished a call about quarterly projections and market volatility. When he finally looked at her, his expression was businesslike. "We need to establish some ground rules," he said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter. He didn't offer her one. "In public, you're madly in love with me. You hang on my every word, smile at my jokes, and look at me like I'm the most fascinating man you've ever met. In private, we maintain professional boundaries. Your bedroom is down the hall from mine. We don't need to pretend when no one is watching." Sarah's cheeks burned. What if someone asks how we met? What if they want details about our relationship? "We met at a hospital charity gala 6 months ago. I was immediately smitten by your compassion and intelligence. You were hesitant to date someone in my position, but I wore you down with persistent charm. We're planning a spring wedding." He recited the facts like he was reading from a script. "My assistant has prepared a more detailed backstory. Study it." The manila folder he slid across the desk contained pages of information about their fictional romance, favorite restaurants they'd supposedly visited, movies they'd seen together, inside jokes they shared. Sarah felt sick reading it. This is insane. People will see right through us. People see what they want to see. Society wives want to believe in fairy tale romances. Business associates want to believe I'm settling down and becoming more predictable. My family wants to believe I'm finally giving them the grandchildren they've been demanding. Alexander's voice was flat, emotionless. "Everyone has a reason to believe our story." The Blackwood dinner was Sarah's first test, and she failed spectacularly. Margaret Blackwood was the kind of woman who could smell weakness from across a room. perfectly coiffed and dripping with jewelry that probably cost more than Sarah's mother's house. Her husband Charles was quieter, but no less intimidating, his pale eyes studying Sarah like she was a balance sheet that didn't quite add up. "So, Sarah," Margaret purred over the appetizer course, "Alexander tells me you're a nurse. How noble. I'm sure you see all sorts of interesting cases at the hospital." "I work in pediatrics," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Children are remarkably resilient. They bounce back from things that would destroy adults." "How fascinating." Margaret's smile was sharp. "And you met our Alexander at a charity function?" "Which one exactly?" Sarah's mind went blank. She couldn't remember which gala Alexander had mentioned in their fake backstory. Panic fluttered in her chest as the silence stretched. Alexander's hand found hers, under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in what looked like an intimate gesture, but felt like a warning. "The Children's Hospital benefit last fall," he said smoothly. Sarah was volunteering naturally. I took one look at her and knew I had to meet the woman who could make crying children smile. His thumb stroked across her knuckles, and despite everything, Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "How romantic." Margaret's tone suggested it was anything but. "And the wedding? Spring?" Alexander mentioned. "We're still working out the details," Sarah managed. "With my mother's health issues, we want to make sure she's well enough to enjoy the celebration." That, at least, was true. Charles leaned forward with apparent interest. "What sort of health issues?" Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever she talked about her mother's condition. "Cancer. She's undergoing an experimental treatment that seems to be working, but it's been a difficult journey." Something shifted in Margaret's expression. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and Sarah glimpsed genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. Cancer is a terrible disease. We lost Charles's brother to it 3 years ago." The rest of the dinner passed more smoothly, but Sarah felt drained by the time they got back to the penthouse. She kicked off the borrowed heels and sank onto the pristine white couch, her feet throbbing. "You did well enough," Alexander said, loosening his tie. "Margaret, Blackwood has destroyed bigger fish than you, so surviving dinner with her intact is actually impressive. I almost ruined everything in the first 10 minutes. But you didn't, that's what matters." He poured himself another whiskey, and after a moment's hesitation, poured one for her too. "You'll get better at it. Lying becomes easier with practice." Sarah stared at the amber liquid in her glass. "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "It's supposed to be realistic. You signed up for a year of deception, Sarah. You might as well get comfortable with it." The weeks blurred together in a haze of social obligations and carefully orchestrated appearances. Gallery openings where Sarah pretended to understand abstract art, while Alexander's hand rested possessively on her lower back. Business dinners where she smiled and nodded, while men discussed deals worth millions of dollars. Charity luncheons, where society wives dissected her clothes, her hair, her suitability as Alexander's bride with surgical precision. The hardest part wasn't the events themselves, but the moments in between. Sitting beside Alexander in the car, his cologne filling the small space while they maintained polite silence. Walking into restaurants where the maitre d' knew him by name and treated Sarah like royalty because of who she was with. Lying in the enormous bed at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering who she was becoming. Her mother's treatment was working. The doctors were amazed by her progress, calling it a minor miracle. Sarah visited the hospital every day, watching color return to her mother's cheeks and strength return to her voice. It should have been the happiest time of her life, but instead she felt like she was mourning the person she used to be. "You look different, Miha," her mother said during one visit, studying Sarah's face with concern. "Sadder. Is everything all right?" "I'm fine, Mum. Just tired." Sarah forced a smile and smoothed her mother's graying hair. "The important thing is that you're getting better. But at what cost?" Maria's voice was soft but insistent. "You're wearing expensive clothes, driving a fancy car, living somewhere you won't tell me about. Where is this money coming from?" Sarah had prepared for this question, crafted a story about a new job with better pay and benefits. but looking into her mother's eyes, the woman who had raised her to always tell the truth, the lies stuck in her throat. "I'm taking care of things, Mum. That's all you need to worry about." "That's what scares me," Maria whispered. "You've always taken care of everyone else, even when it hurt you. Promise me you're not sacrificing too much for this," Sarah promised, even though they both knew it was another lie. The first crack in her carefully constructed facade came at a fundraiser for the city's new art museum. Sarah was making small talk with a group of wealthy donors when she spotted a familiar face across the room. Rebecca Chen had been her study partner in nursing school, her closest friend during those grueling years of 18-hour days and impossible exams. Now she was standing 20 feet away in a simple black dress, looking as shocked as Sarah felt. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Sarah saw her own confusion reflected in Rebecca's face. Before she could decide what to do, Rebecca was walking toward her, weaving between clusters of people in designer gowns. "Sarah?" Rebecca's voice was uncertain, like she wasn't sure she was seeing correctly. "What are you doing here?" "Rebecca, hi." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone could hear it. This is Sarah, darling." Alexander appeared at her side as if summoned, his arms sliding around her waist in a gesture that looked natural but felt like a trap. "Is this a friend of yours?" "Rebecca Chen." Rebecca extended her hand to Alexander, her nurse's training making her polite even when she was clearly confused. "Sarah and I went to nursing school together. I'm here with the hospital board. They asked a few staff members to attend to represent the pediatric ward." "How wonderful." Alexander's smile was perfect, charming, completely fake. "Sarah has told me so much about her nursing school friends. I'm Alexander Hartley." Sarah watched Rebecca's face change as recognition hit. Everyone in Denver knew the Hartley name, and the gossip columns had been full of speculation about Alexander's mysterious new girlfriend. Rebecca's eyes moved between them, clearly trying to piece together how her friend, who used to eat ramen noodles for dinner every night, was now wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "It's so good to see you," Rebecca said carefully. "We should catch up soon. Maybe we could have coffee." "That would be lovely," Sarah heard herself say, even though she knew it was impossible. How could she sit across from her best friend and pretend that everything was normal? How could she look Rebecca in the eye and lie about every aspect of her current life? After Rebecca disappeared back into the crowd, Alexander's grip on Sarah's waist tightened. "Old friends can be dangerous," he murmured in her ear, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. "They remember who you used to be before you became who you need to be." Sarah pulled away from him, anger flashing hot in her chest. "She's my friend. She cares about me." "She's a complication. Friends ask questions. They want honesty, intimacy, truth, none of which you can afford to give her right now." Alexander's eyes were cold, calculating. "I suggest you keep your distance. You don't get to tell me who I can and can't see." "Actually, I do. That's part of our arrangement, remember? You're not Sarah Mitchell, struggling nurse, anymore. You're Sarah Mitchell, my fiancée. Every relationship you have reflects on me now." The words hit her like a slap. Sarah stared at this man who owned her time, her appearance, her entire identity, and felt something crack inside her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear off the expensive dress and the borrowed jewelry and reclaim herself. Instead, she smiled at the approaching mayor's wife and complimented her on her philanthropic work. But that night, alone in her pristine bedroom, Sarah finally cried. She cried for the woman she used to be, the friends she was losing, the person she was becoming. She cried until her designer makeup ran in dark streaks down her cheeks, and her carefully styled hair fell in tangled waves around her shoulders. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Sarah was reviewing files in Alexander's home office when she accidentally knocked over a stack of folders, papers scattered across the expensive carpet. And as she scrambled to collect them, one document caught her eye. It was a background check on her, dated 3 days before the charity auction. Every detail of her life was laid out in clinical terms: her mother's diagnosis, her financial struggles, her work schedule, even her relationship history. "You knew," she said when Alexander found her sitting on the floor surrounded by papers. "Before the auction, before I even walked on that stage, you already knew everything about me." Alexander's face was unreadable as he surveyed the mess. "I told you I research everyone I do business with. But this is dated before we met. You didn't research me after you bought me. You targeted me." Sarah's voice was rising, her composure finally cracking completely. "The whole thing was planned, wasn't it? My participation in that auction wasn't random. You arranged it. I needed someone with the right combination of desperation and integrity. Someone who would honor our agreement, but could be molded into what I needed." Alexander began collecting the scattered papers, his movements efficient and emotionless. "You fit the profile perfectly." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. "Profile, what am I to you, some kind of business acquisition?" "Essentially, yes." He straightened, holding the reassembled files. "Did you think this was some romantic fairy tale? That I was going to fall in love with you and we'd live happily ever after?" The casual cruelty of his words shattered something inside her. Sarah had known their arrangement was fake, but some part of her had hoped that maybe, underneath all the calculation and manipulation, there was something real, something human. "You're a monster," she whispered. "I'm a businessman who gets what he needs when he needs it. Right now I need a convincing fiancé, and you need your mother to live. It's a fair trade." Sarah stood up on shaking legs, her whole body trembling with rage and hurt, and something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak. "Fair? You think this is fair? You've taken everything from me. My identity, my friends, my self-respect. You've turned me into a lie. I've given you everything you asked for. Your mother is alive and getting the best possible care. You're living in luxury, wearing clothes most women only dream of, moving in circles you never could have accessed on your own." Alexander's voice was getting colder, more distant. "If you don't like the terms of our agreement, you're welcome to leave. But remember what that choice means for your mother." The threat hung in the air between them like poison. Sarah stared at this man who held her entire world in his hands and realized that she hated him. But she also realized that her hatred didn't matter. Nothing mattered except keeping her mother alive, and that meant staying in this beautiful prison for 8 more months. "I hate you," she said quietly. "That's unfortunate but irrelevant." Alexander walked past her toward the door, then paused. "We have dinner with my parents tomorrow night. They're flying in from New York specifically to meet you. I suggest you pull yourself together and remember why you're here." After he left, Sarah sank back down onto the floor and stared at the place where the scattered papers had revealed the truth. She wasn't Alexander's partner in this charade. She was his property. And the worst part was that she'd sold herself, willingly signed the contract with her own hand, walked into this cage and locked the door behind her. But her mother was alive. Her mother was getting better. And tomorrow night, Sarah would put on another expensive dress, smile at Alexander's parents, and pretend to be madly in love with the man who had bought and paid for her soul. Eleanor and Harrison Hartley were exactly what Sarah had expected. Alexander's mother was elegant in the way that only old money could achieve, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, and her jewelry understated, but undoubtedly worth more than most people's houses. His father had the same sharp eyes as his son, the kind that missed nothing and forgave even less. They studied Sarah over dinner like she was a business proposal that needed careful evaluation. "Alexander tells us you work in pediatrics," Eleanor said, cutting her filet mignon with surgical precision. "How rewarding that must be, caring for sick children." "It is," Sarah replied, forcing warmth into her voice. "Children have this incredible ability to find joy, even in the darkest circumstances. They've taught me more about resilience than any textbook ever could." Harrison leaned forward slightly. "And you're comfortable giving that up? Marriage to Alexander will require a significant time commitment, board meetings, charity obligations, social functions. There won't be much time for nursing." The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She hadn't even considered that marrying Alexander would mean abandoning her career entirely. In all their discussions about their fake engagement, they'd never talked about what came after. What happened to Sarah Mitchell, the nurse, when she became Sarah Hartley, the society wife? We haven't discussed the specifics yet, she managed, glancing at Alexander. His expression was unreadable, but she caught something that might have been surprise in his eyes. Of course you'll give up working. Eleanor's tone suggested this was obvious. Hartley women have a long tradition of philanthropy and social leadership. There's simply no time for a regular job. After dinner, while Alexander dealt with a business call, Eleanor cornered Sarah on the penthouse balcony. The city lights stretched out below them like scattered diamonds, beautiful and cold. "You're not what I expected," Eleanor said, studying Sarah's profile against the night sky. "What did you expect?" "Someone more polished, more obviously suited to this life." Eleanor's voice wasn't unkind, just a matter of fact. "Alexander has always been drawn to challenges, projects he can fix or improve. I wondered if you were another one of his acquisitions." Sarah's heart stopped. Did his mother know? "But watching you tonight, seeing how you talk about your work, your patience," Eleanor paused, something shifting in her expression. "You genuinely care about people. That's rare in our world. Perhaps that's what drew him to you." "Perhaps," Sarah whispered, hating herself for the lie. "A word of advice. Dear, my son is brilliant, driven, successful, but he's also ruthless when he wants something. Don't let him consume you entirely. Keep some part of yourself that belongs only to you." Too late, Sarah thought. He already owns everything. Daddy, next morning brought a crisis that changed everything. Sarah was visiting her mother when Dr. Rodriguez pulled her aside, his expression grave. "The treatment isn't working anymore," he said quietly. "Your mother's body is developing resistance to the experimental drugs. We need to try a different approach, but it's even more expensive and the success rate is lower." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. How much more expensive? Another 300,000 minimum, and that's just for the first round of treatment. Sarah's hands shook as she processed the numbers. She was trapped in Alexander's world. For 8 more months, but even that wouldn't be enough now. She would need him to extend their arrangement, to pay even more money, to own her for even longer. When she got back to the penthouse, she found Alexander in his office with a woman she'd never seen before. Tall, elegant, with auburn hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having to question her place in the world. They were standing close together, looking at documents spread across his desk, and something about their body language made Sarah's stomach clench. "Sarah?" Alexander straightened when he saw her. "This is Victoria Ashford. We've been business partners for several years." Victoria turned and Sarah was struck by her beauty. This was the kind of woman who belonged in Alexander's world, who could navigate charity galas and board meetings without breaking a sweat. The kind of woman he should have been with instead of purchasing a fake fiancé. "So you're the famous Sarah?" Victoria's smile was polite but calculating. "Alex has told me so much about you." Alex. The casual nickname suggested an intimacy, though that made Sarah feel sick. "All good things, I hope," Sarah replied, hating how small her voice sounded. "Of course. Though I have to admit, when Alex first told me about your engagement, I was surprised. It seemed so sudden." Victoria's eyes moved between them, clearly fishing for information. "When you know, you know," Alexander said smoothly, moving to Sarah's side. His hand found her waist in the gesture that had become second nature, but tonight it felt different, possessive in a way that had nothing to do with their fake relationship. After Victoria left, Sarah confronted him. "Who is she really?" "I told you, a business partner." "Don't lie to me, not after everything else." Sarah's voice was raw with exhaustion and desperation. "Are you sleeping with her?" Alexander's expression hardened. "What happens in my private life is none of your business." "Your private life? I am your private life. For the next 8 months, I'm supposed to be the most important person in your world, and you're what? Keeping your real girlfriend on the side? You're not my girlfriend, Sarah. You're not even my friend. You're an employee, and employees don't get to ask personal questions about their employers' relationships." The words hit her like a slap. Sarah stared at this man who had systematically dismantled her entire identity and felt something break inside her that she wasn't sure could ever be repaired. "I need more money," she said quietly. Alexander's expression shifted. "Excuse me? My mother's treatment isn't working. She needs a different protocol that costs another $300,000. I need to extend our arrangement." "That wasn't part of our original agreement. Neither was you having a girlfriend on the side, but here we are." Sarah's voice was getting stronger, fueled by anger and desperation. "You want me to keep pretending to be madly in love with you? Fine, but it's going to cost you more." Alexander studied her for a long moment, his businessman's mind clearly calculating risks and benefits. 6 more months, an additional 300,000, but my terms become more stringent. "What do you mean?" "You move out of the guest bedroom, we share the master suite. If we're going to convince people we're truly in love, we need to be more convincing." His eyes were cold, predatory. "And you cut all contact with your old life. No more visits to former friends, no more connections to who you used to be. You become Sarah Hartley completely." Sarah felt like she was drowning. "You want me to disappear entirely? I want you to become what I'm paying for. A perfect society wife who exists solely to enhance my reputation and convince my family that I'm capable of normal human relationships. And if I refuse, then our original arrangement ends in 8 months, your mother dies, and you spend the rest of your life drowning in medical debt." Alexander's voice was calm, matter of fact. "Your choice." That night, Sarah packed her few personal belongings and moved them into Alexander's bedroom. The space felt like a mausoleum, all dark wood and expensive fabrics that smelled faintly of his cologne. She lay in the enormous bed, as far from his side as possible, and stared at the ceiling while he worked on his laptop beside her. "This doesn't change anything," she whispered into the darkness after he'd finally turned off the light. "Doesn't it?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "You're in my bed, wearing my ring, living my life. How much of yourself do you have left, Sarah?" She wanted to answer him, to list all the ways she was still herself underneath the designer clothes and practiced smiles. But lying there in the dark, she couldn't think of a single thing that belonged to her anymore. The breaking point came 3 weeks later at Alexander's company Christmas party. Sarah had perfected her role by then, smiling and laughing at all the right moments, discussing charity work and wedding plans with the other wives. She was standing by the bar waiting for another glass of champagne she didn't want, when she overheard a conversation that shattered her world. "Poor Alex," a woman was saying to her companion, "having to go through this charade just to appease his father." "What do you mean?" the other woman asked. "Oh, you didn't know? Harrison threatened to pull Alex's trust fund if he didn't produce a suitable fiancée by his 35th birthday. Something about carrying on the family name. Alex was desperate enough to hire that little nurse to play the part." Sarah's blood turned to ice. The champagne glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Several people turned to look, including Alexander, who was across the room in deep conversation with potential investors. "Are you all right, dear?" the first woman asked, noticing Sarah's stricken expression. "Fine," Sarah managed, "just clumsy." But she wasn't. Fine. She was drowning, suffocating under the weight of a truth she should have seen coming. Alexander hadn't chosen her randomly. He hadn't even chosen her for his mysterious business needs. His own inheritance was on the line, and she was just the most convenient solution to his family problems. Sarah excused herself and stumbled to the ladies' room, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She locked herself in a stall and tried to breathe, tried to process this final betrayal. Everything had been a lie. Every moment, every conversation, every carefully orchestrated touch. She was nothing more than a business expense, a necessary evil he tolerated to secure his fortune. When she finally emerged, Alexander was waiting by the sinks, his expression thunderous. "What happened out there?" he demanded. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Sarah's voice was hollow. "The ghost of my own stupidity." "Sarah, don't." She held up a hand to stop him. "Just don't. I heard them talking, Alexander, about your father's ultimatum. about your inheritance, about how desperate you were to find someone, anyone, to play your fake fiancé. Alexander's face went white, then red. Who told you that? Does it matter? It's true, isn't it? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. My God, I'm not even a business acquisition. I'm a trust fund requirement. It's more complicated than that. No, it's really not. You needed a wife to keep your money, and I needed money to keep my mother alive. We're both just doing whatever it takes to get what we want. Consequences be damned. They stared at each other across the elegant bathroom, two people who had destroyed themselves and each other in pursuit of things that might not even matter. Sarah saw her reflection in the mirror behind Alexander and barely recognized the woman looking back at her, perfectly styled, expensively dressed, utterly hollow. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. Yes, you can. You have to. Your mother will die whether I destroy myself or not. Cancer doesn't care how much money you throw at it, Alexander. It doesn't care how many lies I tell or how many pieces of myself I sacrifice. Sarah's voice was getting stronger, clearer. But I care. I care that I've become someone I hate. I care that I sold my soul and it still might not be enough. Sarah, be reasonable. Reasonable. Sarah laughed again, and this time there was something wild in it. Nothing about this situation is reasonable. A reasonable person would have found another way. A reasonable person wouldn't have let you buy them like a piece of property. She pushed past him toward the door, then stopped. I'll finish out the original agreement. 10 more weeks and then I'm done. I don't care what it costs me. And your mother? My mother raised me to have integrity. Maybe it's time I remembered what that means. Sarah walked out of the bathroom, through the glittering party full of people who thought they knew her, and into the cold December night. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. But as she stood on the sidewalk watching her breath form clouds in the frigid air, she realized that breathing freely and living with the consequences were two very different things. In 10 weeks, she would have to choose between her mother's life and her own soul. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she honestly didn't know which choice she could live with. The city lights blurred through her tears as Sarah finally admitted the truth she'd been running from. Sometimes, love meant letting go even when it destroyed you. Sometimes the most loving thing you could do was stop trying to save someone and start trying to save yourself. But with only 10 weeks left and her mother's life hanging in the balance, Sarah wasn't sure she was brave enough to choose herself. She wasn't sure she deserved to.